I'm Warren Hoge, IPI's Senior Adviser, External Relations. I welcome you to this Beyond the Headlines event featuring Husain Haqqani, the former Pakistani ambassador to the United States and the author of the book Magnificent Delusions, Pakistan, the United States, and an Epic History of Misunderstanding. The timeliness of this book became starkly apparent just weeks ago when a U.S. drone strike killed Hakimullah Maqsood, chief of the Pakistani Taliban and a man responsible for thousands of deaths of thousands of Pakistanis. But it was not just the U.S. that had a bounty on his head, so did Pakistan. And yet the next day reaction in Islamabad was fury against the United States and a charge that the U.S. with that act had violated Pakistani sovereignty and undermined anticipated negotiations with the Taliban. Now clearly the Pakistani military and the Pakistani intelligence service, the all-powerful Inter-Services Intelligence known as ISI, clearly they had to be privately pleased that their sworn enemy Maqsood had been eliminated. Yet they felt obliged to come out publicly decrying his killing and condemning the United States. This duplicitous and dismaying reaction is hard to compute in light of the fact that the U.S. and Pakistan are nominal allies in the fight against terrorism, and that the U.S. has given Pakistan an estimated $17 billion in aid since 9/11. Explaining this disconnect is what Husain Haqqani has set out to do in this book from a very knowing inside perspective. And reading the evidence from both sides, you're not surprised that the word he arrived at to best describe the relationship is delusionary. In another instance of the extent of the distrust that now characterizes the U.S.-Pakistani relationship, Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani schoolgirl who was shot in the head by the Taliban and who has become an icon around the world for popular resistance to terrorism, has been demonized by many in Pakistan, labeled a CIA agent and a pawn of the West. Clerics, politicians, and journalists often blame America for the Taliban's attacks in Pakistan, arguing that the country is vulnerable because of its counterterrorism alliance with Washington. And what is the result of this delusionary relationship marked by recriminations and lies on both sides? A Pew Research Center poll in July found that the United States was more disliked in Pakistan than anywhere else in the world. And a Gallup poll a few months earlier found that the countries most disliked by Americans are Iran, North Korea, and Pakistan. But the relationship endures in part because, put very simply, Pakistan needs the U.S. for its economic aid, and Washington needs Islamabad to continue the fight against terrorism and maintain supply routes to Western forces in Afghanistan. There is also the serious matter of Pakistan's nuclear weapons and Western concern that they don't fall into the hands of terrorists or Islamic fundamentalists. The book takes questions about the relationship back to the time of Pakistan's founding in 1947 and reviews how over that time the U.S. has wondered whether Pakistani leaders can be trusted to keep their word, and Pakistani leaders have wondered how they can maintain their freedom of action while depending upon U.S. aid. Husain has numerous instances of history repeating itself, enshrining these continuing misunderstandings. Let me just mention one. When the incoming Obama administration expressed interest in readjusting the U.S.-Pakistan relationship to reflect modern-day realities, Pakistan responded with a 50-page thesis on strategic threats and interests that basically restated the old notion that India, not terrorism, is the greatest threat to the country's national security. Husain is a man with a keen sense of history, and he noticed that its contents were remarkably reminiscent of a similar document given to President Eisenhower in 1959 by then President Ayub Khan. Obviously, he writes in the book, for Pakistan's permanent institutions of state, nothing had changed in half a century. Husain pulls no punches in this book. In fact, he is very, very tough on Pakistan. It is a powerful book by a writer who knows his subject intimately and has thought about it for a lifetime. And I say that because I want to point out to you that there are books for sale at the door, and Husain will be here when we finish up about 7:45 to chat with you and to sign copies of the books. Finally, I think I'm right in having detected real sorrow in the author's rendering of that harsh judgment about his own country. And in concluding that it's a sorrow, Husain, motivated by your deep concern for your own country, and for the fact that the gap is widening between how Pakistanis view their country and how the rest of the world views it. So with that introduction, Husain, a very warm welcome to IPI, and the floor is yours.
At the very outset, I want everyone to know that this is a book by a Pakistani who feels very strongly about Pakistan, who wants Pakistan to survive and thrive, who wants Pakistan to find prosperity and security, and who at the same time wants to question certain very fundamental notions that have crept into Pakistani thinking in a manner which most Pakistanis just do not reflect on them. Pakistanis are taught a certain narrative of history in school. Many of us are wonderful people, by the way, very charming, very hospitable. A lot of you in the audience probably know Pakistanis who are extremely charming and hospitable and warm. And I know how warm, hospitable and charming we can be because I am one myself, a Pakistani. So this is not about denigrating Pakistanis. Pakistanis are a great people. This is about how the Pakistani state has constructed itself and evolved, and as a result has reached a point where the rest of the world looks upon it far more negatively than it does on many other nations. When I was 18 years old, I got an opportunity to travel for some student conference. I went to Australia, for which I had to obtain a visa, but I stopped over in Thailand. I didn't need a visa. A few months later, I needed to go to England for another student conference, and I wondered whether I required a visa. And I didn't need a visa to go to England, of all places, at that time. Now, if you look at the list of the countries for where Pakistanis need a visa, there are only 4 countries in the world that would allow Pakistanis to get visas upon arrival. Something's gone wrong. The world doesn't trust that a Pakistani can just come for 4 or 5 days, look around, have fun, go away, or to conduct some business and leave. Second, Pakistan has a very young population. Pakistan's median age is 21. So half of its almost 200 million people are below the age of 21. That also means that there are a lot of people in the age group of 5 to 15, which the world considers as school-going age. Well, more than 90% of school-going age children in Bangladesh now go to school. More than 90% of school-going age children in Sri Lanka go to school. More than 90% of school-going age children in India now go to school. What's the figure for Pakistan? 58%. It means 42% of the little children in Pakistan who should be in school are in no school at all. Now, in case you're wondering that, okay, at least, or the Pakistanis who never talk about it, because if you look at Pakistani television, all you see is Pakistani politics, denigration of Pakistan's critics, a little bit of religion thrown in for good measure, a lot of sectarianism and criticism of everybody else in the world, from America to India to Israel. Everybody is responsible for our problems. But if you're wondering what kind of education are young Pakistanis getting, the Vice Chancellor of Pakistan's largest university, Punjab University, the Vice Chancellor is the highest academic officer of that university. He's a physicist. He did a PhD in physics. He has recently published a book in which he says that 9/11 was a setup primarily to pave the way for America's conquest of Muslim lands. America and Britain are controlled by a cabal of bankers, which most of you probably know is a euphemism often used by anti-Semites to refer to people they refuse to refer to directly. So this cabal of, but more interestingly, he says this cabal of bankers controls the world by implanting microchips in the heads of people like me, I think he's talking about, who then serve their purposes and try to act as Western agents. Why do I point out these things? The reason why I point out these things is that even highly educated Pakistanis living abroad, professionals, medical practitioners, doctors, engineers, accounts people, bankers, of which there are many, other professionals, they do not want to confront these issues because they think it somehow is negative about our country. My view is different. My view is that confronting these issues will help us figure out how to change the situation. That is the only way to do it. So my first book is called Pakistan Between Mosque and Military. It was written in 2005. It was a serious effort to try and figure out why and how did Pakistan end up becoming such a center of global Islamism and jihadism. And I traced it to the origins of Pakistan, Pakistan's insecurity about itself and about its future when it was created, and how Pakistan's leaders thought that the way to avoid getting splintered along ethnic lines would be to create a religion-based nationalism that will unite the nation. 1971 came, and that kind of should have split apart, that notion should have split, and people should have realized that religion did not suffice to keep Pakistan together. Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan from 1947 to 71, went ahead and became Bangladesh, sought independence. But that rethink didn't happen. Instead, Pakistan doubled down on its own Islamic identity, sought leadership of the Islamic world, believed in a hypothetical ummah or community of Muslim believers of which it was going to be leader, pursued nuclear weapons, ignored its internal developments, and the United States became an enabler by using the Islamists as a proxy to bleed the Soviet Union. The Americans left after the Soviets left because their purpose was solved. But Pakistan had another strategic plan, and that was to try and have a favorable government for Pakistan in Afghanistan. Now, my answer at that time used to be that there is a very easy way for Pakistan to have a friendly government in Afghanistan. That is, to befriend the government in Afghanistan. But Pakistan's primarily military leaders did not like that particular tack. Anyway, move forward. After this book, I got an opportunity to serve Pakistan as its ambassador. The civilian government I wanted Pakistan to have for so long and that I advocated came about. It was elected, and the elected civilian government asked me to serve as Pakistan's ambassador to the US. As ambassador, I set for myself the mission that I will act as a bridge. So while I was working as ambassador during the day, sometimes during the night, I was also researching the US-Pakistan relationship, because one of the first things I discovered was that almost nobody in Pakistan wants to say anything positive about the United States. So here I was, as ambassador, required to ask the American government to provide us aid, to provide us weapons, to provide us airplanes for our Air Force, to provide us ships for our Navy. And by the way, for those in the audience who do not know it, Pakistan's Navy, since 1954, has almost always been equipped primarily with American ships, which have been provided on a second-hand basis. Ships that have already been used by the Americans, transferred to Pakistan after they've run their life here, but they still have some life in them. They're refurbished and given to Pakistan. Pakistan Air Force still remains primarily American equipped. At least all the major systems in it are American. The major wars that Pakistan has fought in 1965 and 1971 were fought with American equipment, including ground equipment such as armor. And there's a reason why Pakistan needs American equipment. The United States provides allies with either loans to buy equipment from the United States, or sometimes gives equipment as outright aid. Other countries don't do that. And buying military equipment is a very expensive business. So why does my nation dislike a country, dislike dependence on it, but won't do anything to end that dependence? Because if I dislike somebody that I was dependent on, the first thing I would like to do is end that dependence. So that was a query in my mind. For those of you who will ask me, why did you write this book, which is almost the first question that comes to mind to most people, the reason is this was in my head. So as ambassador, I was of course conducting the relationship, doing what I could to make things work, but at the same time I realized both sides have narratives which don't gel. So I decided to research it. My task was made easy because somebody in the Pakistani military intelligence service decided that I was so unreliable that I had to be got rid of. So they created a crisis which has never been sort of creating an allegation that I delivered a memorandum to the American Chairman Joint Chiefs through a businessman, American businessman of Pakistani origin. Now this was of course an absurd charge because if I was so close to the Americans, all I needed to do was carry the memorandum in my pocket and hand it over to Admiral Mullen after a cup of tea, preferably with some sandwiches along with a cup of tea. But the allegation was readily believed in Pakistan, and there was hue and cry on Pakistani media. Our ambassador is a traitor. Treason has been committed. The Supreme Court, which by the way should be the court of last resort, not the court of first instance, immediately got involved and said, well, we have to get to the bottom of this case because it's about national security. How can we have an ambassador who is suggesting to the Americans that they should get involved in trying to save Pakistan from a military coup, which is what the allegation essentially was, and also compromise on Pakistan's nuclear assets and stuff like that. Of course, when I first read the memorandum, I laughed and I said, it's written in such poor English that the one thing I don't want to take responsibility for is not the ideas and contents of the memorandum, but the poor English therein. Anyway, I went back to Pakistan. Supreme Court stopped me from traveling abroad. I resigned. I stayed there for 2.5 months. The Prime Minister and the President of Pakistan, both civilians, supported me fully and kept me to keep me safe. Kept me in the presidency and the Prime Minister's. I was never legally charged. Eventually, the Supreme Court let me travel, and I said, better go back to the United States. So I'm back in the US. I'm teaching, and I'm working in a think tank in Washington D.C. And so soon after returning here, I started work on this book. And I went through the National Security Archives, I went through the Foreign Relations of the United States, declassified documents, I looked at old newspapers at the Library of Congress, I went into presidential papers, American presidential papers, as well as all other potential documents that I could find, and did a lot of research to put together this book. And here's the bottom line of the book. The United States and Pakistan perceived their national interests so widely divergently that they could not really and should not really have been allies. Pakistan's elite, soon after independence, was concerned about only two major things. One was how to fund the new country that they had created. Pakistan received 1/3 of British India's army, but only 17% of British India's revenue sources. The logical thing to do at that time should have been to sit down and think about how large an army can we sustain with the resources we have. Instead, the leaders of Pakistan took a different tack. They said, Pakistan will forever be threatened by India because the Indians did not emotionally and psychologically accept the creation of Pakistan. Even today, Pakistani children learn at schools that India is an existential enemy of Pakistan. Now, as a professor of international relations, I can tell you there is no such thing as existential enemy in the world. There is no such thing as existential enemy in history, because Germany and France have fought more wars than Pakistan and India have. But guess what? They are both in the European Union, and the only thing they occasionally argue about is how much cheese from one should be sold in the other. And similarly, United States and Canada fought wars. People forget. The War of 1812 was between Britain, running Canada, operating from Canada at that time, and the United States. But United States and Canada, no one can think of them as enemies today. Soviet Union and the United States, the huge Cold War, yeah, Mr. Putin might write an op-ed or two in the New York Times every now and then, but he surely doesn't see the United States as an existential enemy, or anybody in America see Russia as an existential enemy. Japan, which was nuked by the United States, does not see the United States as an existential enemy. So anyway, this notion of existential enemy led Pakistan's leaders to decide that instead of cutting the cloth, cutting the suit to the size of the cloth they had, which is the resources they had, should be the basis of deciding how much armed forces they will maintain. They will actually try to get the United States to support Pakistan's armed forces by saying that Pakistan's military will be America's military in fighting communism around the world. Now, an interesting thing is, the Soviet Union did not really take an interest in Pakistan at that time. The Soviet Union did not establish diplomatic relations until 1949 with Pakistan, did not recognize Pakistan. It was just totally disinterested. And now that the Kremlin archives are open, it's even easier to see what was on Stalin's mind at that time. And Pakistan was certainly not there. Many other things must have been there, but Pakistan was not. But Pakistan continued to come to the Americans and say, we want to be your allies. So this is one thing that Pakistanis don't remember, and few Americans remember, that the wooing in this relationship was originally done by Pakistan. When America did decide to become Pakistan's ally, it was because India refused to become America's ally, and India said, we are going to be non-aligned. And by now, the United States had John Foster Dulles as its Secretary of State. There's a wonderful new book. It's unusual for somebody presenting about their own book, promoting somebody else's, but my friend, yours probably, Stephen Kinzer, has written a very good new book about John Foster Dulles and his brother called The Brothers. Anyway, John Foster Dulles was not a particularly knowledgeable man about the world, but he was now Secretary of State about the of one of the world's largest superpowers at that time. And he was told by the British whom he met that, well, what constitutes Pakistan, especially West Pakistan at that time, is home to warrior races and warrior nations. So he had this in his head that if I'm going to recruit troops to fight communism, Pakistan will be a good potential ally. And he came back, and there's an episode in the book which is a conversation between Walter Lippmann and Dulles. So Lippmann approaches Dulles and says, why have you signed up Pakistan as an ally in Southeast Asia when Pakistan is not located in Southeast Asia? And Dulles turns around and says, well, guess what? I have done it because the Pakistanis are great fighters. I have been told by the British that the best fighters in the world are the Gurkhas. And so I have signed on Pakistan as an ally to have the Gurkhas on my side. Lippmann turned around and said, Foster, the Gurkhas are not Pakistanis. Dulles turned around and said, really? Well, they are Muslims, aren't they? And Lippmann said, no, they're not Muslims either. They are Hindus. Now, as most of the people in this room, hopefully everyone, knows that Gurkhas are essentially from Nepal. But in Foster's mind, this notion of martial races had stuck. He knew the Gurkhas were a martial race. He was told Pakistanis are a martial race. He went on and signed Pakistan on as an ally to enroll the Gurkhas to fight communism. But Pakistan asked for 5.5 divisions to be raised and equipped, and it was done. Everything was provided. But when Pakistan was asked to provide troops for Korea, Pakistan said, no, we have a problem with India first. America has to solve our problem with India before we can give you a single troop to fight in Korea. Then later they were asked to provide troops for Laos, and that didn't happen. Vietnam, same thing. But there was still, the military assistance still came through. The delusion on the part of the Americans was that if we give them enough aid, we can make them change their national interest as they perceive it. That was wrong. Pakistan went to war with India in 1965. Then, the war, of course, didn't turn out well for Pakistan. None of its war objectives were fulfilled. And the Pakistani military suffered because America cut off military equipment, supplies of spare parts. Pakistanis, the people of Pakistan, I was a little kid at that time, I remember anti-Americanism raging at that time. And the reason was everybody said America stabbed us in the back. Because no one in Pakistan had been told that while signing the treaties with Pakistan, or getting Pakistan signed onto the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization Treaty and the Central Treaty, the Americans had always clarified in writing clearly that they applied only to communist aggression and did not apply to military action involving any of the signatory nations, especially if they initiated war against another non-communist nation, which is what India was. Fast forward to 1971, there's another great book on 1971, The Blood Telegram by Gary Bass. 1971 was the West
Coming
Pakistani.
here on January 14th.
Oh, good.
Gary Bass says.
The Pakistani military conducted what the world just deems to be genocide. Richard Nixon, and you know everything Richard Nixon said in the Oval Office is available on tape, or almost everything. So you can listen to it. And if, like me, you are challenged in the department of knowing English language swear words, it will really educate you enormously. So going to the Nixon library and going through this, I found conversations between Kissinger and Nixon in which Nixon recognizes that Pakistan can't win in East Pakistan, that Pakistan's policy is wrong. He called Yahya Khan an honorable man and a helpful man who had helped him reach out to China. But he said he's on a suicide mission. Now what would a real friend do with a person who is on a suicide mission? Stop them from suicide. But that is not what Nixon did. Instead, Nixon became an enabler in Yahya Khan's delusions that Pakistan will somehow be able to hold on to East Pakistan, which constituted the majority of Pakistan's population and almost half of Pakistan's territory at the time. India intervened, Pakistan lost. Pakistanis, instead of revisiting everything again and saying we don't need too many arms now, let's focus inward, let's try and develop Pakistan, now led by a civilian leader, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who had positioned himself as an anti-American candidate in the elections. Now he was visiting America, and you have in my book descriptions of his meetings with people like Nixon. Nixon actually had called him an SOB earlier and called him a demagogue, but now Nixon wanted to be his friend as well, all primarily because of the assumption that if we get Pakistan, we can force India to join our alliance. The truth was neither Pakistan nor India needed to be part of the Cold War. There was no serious Cold War being fought. It wasn't a Cold War arena, South Asia. That was not where it was being fought. It was in Europe, it was in East Asia. It wasn't, but that was the assumption. Move further forward, Afghanistan, everybody knows about Pakistan's role. Again, the Americans assumed that they will be able to arm train this whole thing through Pakistan's military and its intelligence service without thinking too deep and finding out what they wanted. And the Pakistani war in Afghanistan, I have said in my book that many Americans thought, and after seeing that wonderful movie with Tom Hanks, people think that the war in Afghanistan against the Soviets was Charlie Wilson's war. The truth is, the Americans were giving arms for Charlie Wilson's war, but the Americans weren't doing the fighting. It was actually General Ziaul Haq's war. And Ziaul Haq was trying to get what he called strategic depth, take over Afghanistan, have an Islamist government there, so that the Pashtuns of Afghanistan would stop looking towards the Pashtuns of Pakistan for some kind of a Pashtun nation. This insecurity is a very important theme in Pakistan, that somehow Pakistan is challenged and threatened. And because Pakistan has had long spells of military rule and still under civilian rule a lot of military domination, it has always seen the world through the military prism. People don't see the fact that half the kids not being in school, or the other half that are in school not learning much that is relevant to the modern world. They don't see that as a security threat. And that, I think, is the Pakistani delusion. As ambassador, one of the things I found was that the number of students from Pakistan in American universities, around 5,200, is less than the number of students from Nepal that study in American universities. Now the 5,200 who do study here, they're very bright, smart people, very young, nice people. Many of them blog, many of them write in English, they tweet, because they haven't done the statistical work, they don't know that they are just a small 5,200 minority. So they get all defensive and say, you know what, people like us, being there. How can you say we are being left behind? Well, guess what? There's a lot of individual success of Pakistanis. But collectively, the nation is not moving forward. And it will only move forward when Pakistan starts recognizing its problems, when Pakistan realizes that the idea of a religion-based hyper-nationalism supported by nuclear weapons and jihadi terrorism is not going to work. And it will put Pakistan only further and further on a confrontational path with the rest of the world. And so, Pakistan also needs to get over its obsession about India. Whatever Pakistan tries, India will have the advantage of size. Pakistan's advantage lies in having closer ties with its neighbors, not in having a notion of existential animosity and hatred. Pakistan cannot forever rely on American arms to confront India. And Pakistan cannot hope always to stand on America's shoulders and become India's equal. Pakistan needs to find comfort in its own development, in its own prosperity. The objective of the Pakistani state should not be military parity with India, it should be prosperity and security at home. We all know about the jihad. I'm expecting questions about it. We all know about drones, etc., etc. I've left that for the question and answer because there are certain questions. Whenever you talk about Pakistan, there are 3 questions from the audience you can always expect. Somebody will definitely ask a question about nuclear weapons, so don't make it part of your original remarks. Somebody will always ask a question about drones, and somebody will always ask a question about terrorism inside Pakistan. I'll leave that to your questions and answers. What is the magnificent delusion? The Pakistani delusion is that by being America's allies, they can somehow become a regional great power and confront India. The American delusion has been that they can somehow use Pakistan and by giving more aid, get Pakistan to change what Pakistan's leaders and especially military leaders have determined as Pakistan's national interest. What I propose is, especially to Pakistanis, and I see at least 4 or 5 in this audience, we Pakistanis need an honest debate inside our country about what is Pakistan's national interest. We never have it. We have always had these assumptions since 1948. That's why I write the episode about Ayub Khan for Eisenhower and General Kiani writing for Obama. It's a very fixed paradigm of national interest. As nations evolve, their national interests should change too. And lastly, Pakistan needs to find peace in its pluralism. Pakistan is a country of Sindhis and Punjabis, of Baluchis and Pashtuns, of Gilgitis and Hunzawals and Urdu-speaking Mahajirs and Gujarati-speaking Mahajirs and Baloch. Pakistan is not a monolith. Pakistan is not a country of Sunni Muslims alone. Pakistan started out with 23% of its population as religious minorities in 1947. That has come down to 3%. No normal demographic change can account for that. The only thing that accounts for it is that large numbers of people from religious minorities have found security in leaving the country. We all know about the blasphemy laws. We all know how a community, the Ahmadis, were declared non-Muslim by a constitutional amendment. There is no constitution in the world that has a constitutional amendment that explains or defines somebody's religion for them. You know, it would be akin to having a constitutional amendment in the United States that says no one who is Mormon can call himself Christian. That's the kind of amendment that is. We need to attend to these, but we won't get there until and unless we have a robust internal debate. As far as America is concerned, the Americans need to reconsider their past policy of continuing to invest in building up Pakistan's military potential and thereby feeding the Pakistani delusion. And so we now have 2 dysfunctions to deal with. The US-Pakistan relationship is dysfunctional and Pakistan, unfortunately, is dysfunctional. I'll stop here, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of interesting questions that I can answer. Thank you all very much.
Nawaz Sharif, the current Prime Minister of Pakistan, all the realities you just described about what Pakistan has become and sort of where it's going, yet he says he wants Pakistan to have an economy like South Korea's. How can he say he wants that and keep pursuing the policies that you've just described as being so dysfunctional?
Well, I mean, in Mr. Sharif's case, he used to say that he wanted an economy like South Korea's even way back when he was a prime minister from 1997 to 1999, the second term he had. And I remember writing a column at that time because in one day he gave two speeches. He spoke to the Chamber of Commerce in Lahore and he said, my vision for Pakistan is for Pakistan to be like South Korea. And then he spoke at the convention of religious clerics. And there he said, I draw my inspiration from the Taliban. And I said, anybody who can have those two inspirations simultaneously in their head and think that they are workable aren't going anywhere. Lo and behold, 2 years later, he was toppled in a military coup by General Musharraf. So I hope that something like that doesn't happen. It's a good thing that Pakistan has had a democratic transition. Mr. Sharif has been elected. I hope that he is much more clear about his priorities and wants the South Korea priority to dominate the impulse for religious purification that had been the characteristic or hallmark of his previous two terms. But it's not an easy task, and I will be very candid here. I was, of course, appointed by President Zardari and Prime Minister Gilani, so that was a different political party. I do have sympathies with them. But change in Pakistan or reform of Pakistan is not just about who governs Pakistan. It's about the debate and discourse in Pakistan. Can somebody in Pakistan fire that Vice Chancellor for making that stupid statement? Mr. Vice Chancellor, you're not supposed to say irrational things like people have microchips, Universities are places where people should be taught on the basis of empirical knowledge. So give us the empirical evidence of microchips, produce a few people, and by the way, you'll be held criminally liable if you cut open somebody's brain and can't find a microchip, And that is just not happening. Mr. Sharif is not able to do that. And to be fair, the previous government wasn't able to do completely either. The national discourse is such that, the shouts of traitor, traitor, or anti-Islam just dominate. And so it's a bigger task. Now, how do I see it happening? I think Mr. Sharif could do it, or President Zardari could have done it. And the future government can do it. But what will be needed will be circumstances that make it possible for Pakistanis to think that, oh God, we are in trouble. Problem is, whenever there has been trouble, the United States comes out with a bailout. So the country's foreign exchange reserves are depleting. The ambassador would go hat in hand, the metaphorical hat, not the real one, hat in hand to the National Security Council or State Department or somebody and say, we are in trouble, etc., etc. And magically a little bit of conversation will take place, and then there will be some money that America owes Pakistan for helping in the war against terror, called the Coalition Support Funds. And there will be enough money put into the State Bank of Pakistan for Pakistan to avoid bankruptcy or default in it. Now when you have that kind of ability to just never, always be on edge. I mean, if you read old newspapers, and by the way, Warren, I've done that. I've quoted a lot of New York Times old stories.
I saw that in the book.
I deliberately did it, including some from your time as foreign editor. I just show them to point out that sometimes reading old newspapers is a good thing, because it tells you that the story actually is just a new take on something that's been there for a while. So it's somebody having an illness that's been going there for a long time. I don't know if anybody remembers in Godfather 2, I think, there is that one line where about Hyman Roth, Michael says, well, he's been dying for a long time. He's been on the deathbed for a long time, something like that. So what that does is, it does not enable Pakistan's leaders who want change to be able to push the agenda for change with a sense of urgency, because there's always that backing away. I think people need to recognize, why are there so many jihadi leaders who roam about Pakistan freely? Malala Yousafzai can't go back to the country. She was shot at by the Taliban. A child, 11-year-old, standing up and saying, all I want is to go to my school. Don't shut down my school.
And the new leader of the Pakistani Taliban is the man Faluda.
Fazlullah, he was personally
said if she comes
responsible.
back, we'll shoot her again.
He was personally responsible for that attack on her, and he's been elected leader of the Taliban. But the point is, then if Pakistan makes up its mind and says the Taliban are the enemy, then Pakistan's military will fight them. But if to get the Pakistani military to fight the Taliban, you have to tell them, oh, by the way, these Taliban are actually Indian agents, then you are living in some cuckoo land. It's not reality. You have to bring the entire nation, sort of gear it up towards facing reality. This whole discourse about, Haqqani says you should have good relations with the United States, must be an American agent.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like saying, okay, Prime Minister says we should have good relations with Saudi Arabia, does it make him a Saudi agent? Or somebody says we should have good relations with nobody, does that mean they are nobody's agent? I mean, what kind of a discourse is this in which ideas are no longer debated, substantive policy alternatives are no longer debated, people are cast as anti-Pakistan, or if you don't, look, a nation of 200 million should be open to 200 opinions or 200,000 opinions. Why is it that opinions endanger Pakistan's security? It is a semi-authoritarian, semi-totalitarian worldview. On the one hand, it's an open society, but on the other hand, there is something very limiting about not debating ideas openly. Then the question of India. I mean, I've found so many otherwise enlightened Pakistanis start frothing at the mouth when India comes about. It's so deeply ingrained. Because it's as if defining Pakistan, being a Pakistani implies being anti-Indian, or saying that, what is Pakistan? Pakistan is the country that stands up to India. Why? The two-nation theory, as a theory, can be discussed, but it's no longer practical because the idea was that two nations in India. One, the Muslims, because of their historic experience, and everybody else. Well, guess what? If there were two nations, they are now divided in three countries. Bangladesh, India, Pakistan all have almost equal numbers of Muslims. So why keep on insisting that that is the basis of Pakistani nationalism? I was born a Pakistani. Everybody in this room who's from Pakistan that was born after 1947, we were born Pakistanis. Why can't we have a functional nationalism? A nationalism that is about, this is our country, let's make it work, let's put the 42% kids that don't go to school, let's find a vice chancellor for our universities, let's find vice chancellors for our universities who don't believe in conspiracy theories, and let's let the religious clerics conduct religious services, and politics be about economic issues, social issues, and functional problems that the nation faces.
Husain, I have just two more questions, and the second one is, or the first of the two, is the Taliban. Is it realistic to think there could be negotiations with the Taliban? Are there good Taliban and bad Taliban? Is it imaginable that the Taliban might one day be incorporated into a government of Pakistan?
Individual Talibans could be incorporated into the government in Afghanistan or Pakistan after they give up arms. But very frankly, I have a simple question for you. How do you conduct negotiations with somebody whose worldview is rooted in the 8th century, and your aspiration is to make the country a 21st century nation? These people, whenever there have been negotiations, there have been deals with the Taliban before. And each deal has been broken because of their understanding of things being very different. I'll just give you one small example, since episodes and anecdotes are sometimes fun. In 1992, the Mujahideen, there was a negotiation among them about replacing the communist regime in Afghanistan. So they were fighting amongst themselves. Anyway, somebody came up with the idea that we should take all the Mujahideen leaders to Makkah, and that's the holiest place of Islam, make them do an agreement there. Nobody will break that agreement. Under that agreement, a certain Mr. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar was to be Prime Minister, Mr. Rabbani was to be President, etc. So it was announced, everybody came back, we thought civil war will end. Soon after that, Mr. Hekmatyar's people came to the government and said, I was in government at that time, and said, the other side won't let us get into Kabul. So we contacted them and we said, you promised in Makkah that you will recognize him as Prime Minister? They said, oh, we fully recognize him as Prime Minister. Absolutely. But we promised that we will recognize him as Prime Minister. We never promised that the Prime Minister could enter the capital of the country. So that kind of thing, I don't see the negotiations. I mean, I'm not, this is the International Peace Institute. I would never dare say in a peace institute that there should be no negotiations. All I'm saying is you have to be very clear about who you're negotiating with, what you're negotiating about, and what the end objective is. Usually intransigent people only come to the negotiating table when they are hurting. In case of the Taliban, right now they are not hurting. What happened was President Obama announced America is leaving Afghanistan in 2014. Mullah Umar has always said, Americans have the watches, we have the time. So all President Obama did was he actually gave a deadline. He told them how long they have to wait. They're just waiting. My fear is after the Americans leave Afghanistan, we will see a resurgence of the Taliban in a military sense. Hopefully the Afghan National Army will be strong enough to defeat them in Afghanistan. And in Pakistan, the armed forces will have enough sense to realize that if Afghanistan goes under Taliban rule, there will be a spillover of Talibanization in Pakistan. And this will be a regional, not just an Afghan problem.
The last thing I want to ask you before we go to the floor is about until several years ago, you were Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. Now, I think I'm right in thinking you would fear for your life if you went back to Pakistan. Tell us about that of Memogate.
Well, there's no story of Memogate. I kind of hinted at that. I mean, it was an absurd charge. The gentleman did not have much credibility. If I had been given an opportunity to testify before the Memo Commission, as it was called, the commission that was investigating it, I would have given an explanation of everything.
What was Memogate? What was the charge?
The charge was that this Pakistani-American businessman claimed in an op-ed that a senior Pakistani diplomat, he didn't name me, later on he named me, he said, had approached him to approach the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen, and request him to get the US military to use its influence with the Pakistani military to avert a coup right after Bin Laden was found in Pakistan. And in the process, this memo promised that Pakistan will give America access to its nuclear weapons. We will have a new national security team that will be what the Americans want, etc. Basically, like implying that somebody was selling out to the Americans in a country where everybody is very concerned about national sovereignty. Now, if there was something wrong, there should have been a proper trial. Normally what happens is you charge somebody in a criminal court, the case moves forward, witnesses come. What was done was a top-down thing. The Supreme Court took cognizance of this and said, okay, Mr. Ijaz should give his testimony and we will create a commission. He refused to come to Pakistan, then he was allowed to testify by sitting in London in front of a video camera. By now I had come to the United States and I said, if his life is in danger in going to Pakistan, mine is too. So I should also be allowed to give my, record my statement. And as far as my lawyers were concerned, we questioned the very legality of the process because we don't think criminal processes can start from the Supreme Court. We believe that Supreme Court should be the court of last resort, not the court of first instance. So eventually, I mean, this commission came up with findings that one-sided, without hearing my side or refusing to hear my side, saying, yeah, this must have happened and this Haqqani character can't be relied upon because in his heart of hearts, his future lies in America and he cares about America more than he cares about Pakistan, etc. It was just used for generating hatred and propaganda. I feel that originally the idea of Memogate was actually to bring down the civilian government because the premise was that the ambassador couldn't have done something like this without being asked by the president or the prime minister. So if we put pressure on him, he will turn around. You might remember that our prime minister, elected prime minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was executed in a fake murder charge where the argument was that the guys who conducted the murder said, we were told by this man to do the murder, That man then came to court and said, oh, I was instructed by the Prime Minister to do it, and on that basis the Prime Minister was sent to the gallows. So it was a similar thing. I stood my ground and I said, I didn't do it, let alone being told by the President or the Prime Minister to do it. And so in a way that saved the civilian government, although it weakened it considerably. The bandying about of treason charges does create confusion in a nation, and unfortunately the role of the Pakistani judiciary and the Pakistani media in that entire affair was very, very sad and tragic, and was a reflection on the crisis that confronts Pakistan. To this day, by the way, there are no legal charges against me. I have not been convicted by any court of law, and I can go back to Pakistan tomorrow if I want in a legal sense. But when there's been so much propaganda about my being a traitor or an American agent, how safe am I? Even Israeli agent, how safe am I? And we must remember that the governor of Punjab, Salman Taseer, was killed by his own guard, who killed him because he had heard on television that he had committed blasphemy. He didn't know, but the guard just got motivated by what he had heard. So what guarantee do I have that once I arrive in Pakistan, the cab driver that I am taking from airport to my brother's home doesn't decide, hey, I've got a traitor sitting in the cab, let me just stab him. It's not the environment in which I want to go back to Pakistan. My feeling is that with the passage of time, the effect of that propaganda will wane. Pakistan's situation may change, and it has changed in the past for others. Hopefully, someday I will return to Pakistan and make the same arguments that I'm making here there. Because in the end, I am absolutely convinced that my diagnosis of what I see as Pakistan's malaise is absolutely correct. And if my diagnosis is correct, then the patient will either need medicine someday and will turn to all those who are willing to administer that medicine, or it will unfortunately reach a point where that malaise causes much greater harm to it. Either way, holding on to my point of view, expressing it to Americans as well as Pakistanis as well as other nationalities is what I think is the best thing for me to do until the time when I can return back to my country comes.
By the way, I mentioned that Gary Abbas is coming in January with his book. Next month, in December, Munoz, known to some of you, is coming here, and his book is Getting Away with Murder, Benazir Bhutto's Assassination and the Politics of Pakistan. I had a question in the front row here. Let's go.
Shazia Rafi from Parliamentarians for Global Action. Mr. Haqqani, can you say something about the gas pipeline deal that was on the table, that is sort of still on the table, limping along between Iran, Pakistan and India? Because part of what you're talking about in terms of changing the equation, changing how Pakistan sees itself, and changing how we see our major neighbors, this was an initiative that came really from the sort of best instincts of our people in all three countries in some way, and it could have been a sort of a solid peace-dependent, interdependent initiative. And secondly, given what is being negotiated right now with Iran, if Iran comes in from the cold, do you think it will allow this deal to revive?
Pakistan has a severe energy crisis. I mean, it's ironic that Pakistan used to argue in the 70s and 80s that our nuclear program, we need our nuclear program because we have energy problems. We never solved our energy problems. We have a serious energy crisis. Pakistan is short of gas and oil, and Iran is a natural supplier. India is another energy deficit country, and India needs oil and gas as well. We haven't, although the Zardari government took the initiative, signed the agreement with India and Iran, there are problems. Pipelines are like babies. They are much easier to conceive than they are to deliver. And so you have to have huge investment on the Iranian side of the pipeline, which the Iranians are willing to do. Then there's Pakistani side, and then it would be the Indian side. Then there is the politics of it. If Iran does not come out of the cold, then Pakistan will not be able to go ahead with that project without, or at least international funders will not be able to do that without some consequences. But look, this is not just about pipelines. Pakistan needs a much bigger vision. Will Pakistan forever present itself and think of itself as a warrior nation? Or will it think of itself as a trading nation? Pakistan sits at the crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, West Asia. Pakistan could benefit as being the center of the trade routes. Indian goods going into Central Asia, Iranian goods going into into India, Central Asian goods coming through Afghanistan down to the sea and going on to East Asia, etc. There's tremendous potential. The mathematics of it, the arithmetic of it has been worked out by economists several times over. But if you believe and your military says no, first our concerns about India have to be 100% addressed. Kashmir has to be solved before we will even have normal trade relations with India. Now we all know that the most favored nation status basically just means normal trade relations. But, and the Zardari government signed the most favored nation agreement with India. India had given it to Pakistan many years earlier. So Pakistan's cabinet approved it. Where is it gone? Similarly, the transit trade agreement that was negotiated while I was ambassador. Great detail. Ambassador Richard Holbrooke stayed up all night one night, with me, kept me up as well. And the two commerce ministers worked on it, and we had an agreement on transit trade. But transit trade agreement for Afghanistan works, and Afghanistan is a landlocked country, it needs access to the sea through Pakistan. It makes sense to the Afghans only if trade from India is also open, but the military vetoed that and that didn't happen. So my point being that I love hearing from a lot of people who are sort of professionals and technocrats who think that there is some economic project or etc. that will change everything. I think none of them will be able to get off the ground unless we get the politics right. Because here is a serious political problem that's started. Who doesn't understand that the benefit of Pakistan would be to have higher investment? But Pakistan gets less foreign direct investment than any of the other major emerging markets. Most of the investment is portfolio investment because it's easy to put in, and there are traders who make a lot of money doing that. Stock market keeps doing well under difficult circumstances. But bricks and mortar, how would you ask a company that is managed by a few people who consider themselves Christian, a few people who are Jewish, a couple of Hindus, a couple of Muslims, how do you expect them to risk sending their people in a big project in Pakistan at a time when, do you remember that Mr. Weinstein or whatever his name is from Punjab University who's been kidnapped and is missing? Salman Taseer's son is kidnapped and missing. Prime Minister Ginani's son has been kidnapped and missing. People get killed randomly, etc. So, very frankly, I want all projects to open up for Pakistan and the economy to really thrive. But I think I'm sensitive enough to understand that there are big picture issues that are serving as a bottleneck. There's the Iran dimension, but there's the Pakistani dimension also. Pakistan couldn't get the capital for building its side of the pipeline. And now Iran is saying, maybe we'll consider something else. Because after all, these projects people don't wait on projects forever.
I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions now. Start here, and then Jeffrey, and then here the third. So just make note, if you will.
Thank you. Donald Camp, retired Foreign Service Officer. As perhaps one of the enablers, I don't want to appear too defensive here, but I would really be interested in hearing your thoughts about what some policy ideas for U.S. policy toward Pakistan, given the situation that exists today. Because this is an issue that is always discussed in U.S. government circles. What should we be doing with Pakistan? Over the years, we've tried a lot of things beyond excess defense articles and coalition support funds. We've done infrastructure, we've done education, we've done huge Fulbright programs, we've done Indo-Pakistan reconciliation programs. What might work?
Actually,
we're going to take 2 more. Right behind you, Jeffrey Laurenti.
Hi, Jeff Laurenti. I wonder if you could explore for us a bit what are the internal drivers of the political debate in Pakistan, both with regard to the domestic agenda and whoever the foreign friends are, to the extent they see anybody, and the role of the Pakistani media, both Urdu and English, in shaping that debate. The fact is that the ultra-religious parties get pretty small percentages of the vote, and yet the debate seems dominated, often in religious terms, is the shameful record of 58% primary school enrollment something that surfaces, and do voters think that when they're voting for one party or another that there is a program that's going to be done? And similarly, when they look outside, do those voters think that, well, if not the Americans, we've got real friends in the Saudis, or the Chinese will take care of us? Do they see an external set of friends, or do they see a world that is almost entirely hostile and unwelcoming?
Should I take both questions together?
Here we go.
Okay,
I'm so glad you asked about the media. Both of us are former journalists. I've been wondering where is the dawn in all this?
On policy ideas, Don, I think that there are some very concrete ones. Maybe a new idea would be actually to not try to give anything, but actually to ask for something. And saying, for once we are not giving you anything.
Including military aid.
Yeah. We are asking you because you owe it to us, to yourself, and to the world. And that is something that has never been tried, because the presumption has always been that aid buys you leverage, which I think now has been proven to be not completely accurate. The fear of isolation, which Pakistan has never really had, will drive people to rethink some of the rhetoric. Because the anti-American rhetoric, I mean, for example, why doesn't anybody ever say, I was the point man and my government asked me to say all the right things about the United States as an ally. And as a consequence, I ended up being painted as an American agent, and all that. But shouldn't it be the job of the major leaders to tell the people of Pakistan why we need this relationship, what we need from it? And it's time to push for that and say, you know what? First of all, we want you to tell the people of Pakistan how America helped. It shouldn't be some former Pakistani ambassador who should write a book about it. American ambassadors should remember it themselves. They should have a talking points list and saying, by the way, we helped you avert the famine in 1953 and again in 1955 with several 100,000 tons of aid, of food aid. We gave you X million tons of aid, etc., etc. And we're not saying that, we shouldn't be humanitarian, etc. But you guys cannot just continue with policies that run against our interest, but not against our interest, against your own interest, and not educate your people. Going back to 1950s, I point out in my book that even in the 1950s, while negotiating a treaty alliance with the United States, Pakistan's leaders were telling the people of Pakistan that they had no intention of becoming America's allies. And nobody called them out on that. I went through all the papers. So you maybe need to change your style of diplomacy. You have to learn that, look, sometimes Americans think that they have only two arrows in their quiver. Take somebody out for lunch or shoot him. But there's a lot in between. There's a lot in between. And so I'd be happy to explore all of that, possibly in a longer essay. But I think to begin with, maybe this pattern of we have to give something to get something should probably be set aside, and a bigger argument should be made. Do you know how much trouble you are in? What I think, for example, I really think with hindsight that Pakistan and Bangladesh and India all would have come to less grief in 1971 if Richard Nixon had sat Yahya Khan down and said, you know what, you can't win in East Pakistan. You're not going to succeed. There's only one way out. Talk to the people who got the votes, the Bengali leaders, the Awami League leaders, negotiate with them and find a solution. We will back you on doing that. And he just couldn't do it because he thought Yahya was such a nice guy and he realized he was being stupid. But sometimes telling stupid people nicely that, you're not being very smart here, my friend, is not a bad idea. On the internal drivers, but we can explore that together, maybe in greater detail. The internal drivers, of course, are that the national discourse is shaped primarily by the religious parties as instruments of influence on behalf of the military. Because if the military makes the decision that it's going to let the people hear voices that say, maybe good relations with India are in Pakistan's interest, maybe good relations with the US are in Pakistan's interest, then those voices will be amplified. So the amplification of the religious parties' voice is primarily because of their close ties to the military and the intelligence apparatus. Why do they do it? I have an episode in my book, an anecdote in which the head of the ISI says to me, we are a poor country, we are a weak country, we are in an asymmetric relationship with the United States. One of our easiest negotiating techniques with them should be to tell them, our people are against you, we, those of us who are dealing with you, are the only thing that stand between an Iran-like situation where everybody is against you and having some influence in our country. And that increases our leverage. That's why they drive that. That's what happens. And the media's role is particularly negative, partly because, again, sometimes you guys don't have the language skills, etc., to follow the media and to just, let alone compete with it. But the media is full of conspiracy theories. The media is a main source right now of driving Pakistan into a national frenzy and narrative that is just not rooted in reality. Some kid gets high marks in the A levels, which is the British examination system, A levels, and that is like the country should be celebrating that. 27 people get killed, at the hands of terrorists. You play it down because you don't want people to get angry about terrorism, etc., etc. Pick out some sentence from Malala Yousafzai's book and go on the media and say that's a blasphemous sentence. Why is it blasphemous? Because it defends a blasphemer. All she said was, my father said to me that my Islam is not so weak that a book by a man called Salman Rushdie will weaken my Islam. How is that blasphemous? By any stretch of the imagination. But they go and do these things, Now my book is being targeted, by the way. There have already been about half a dozen pieces saying, the book commits sort of the ultimate sin and crime of denigrating Pakistan's founding father, showing that he was coveting American support and assistance. I mean, you can't have a discussion and a policy discussion in an environment like that.
Is the book circulating in Pakistan?
Oh yes, it is. It is. It's available in English. It's selling there, hardbound. Has sold quite a number of copies. In fact, the booksellers are pretty happy with the sales. So that's not bad. Hopefully there will be an Urdu translation and it will be read. But the reading public is smaller now than before. And how that can change is, look, this dichotomy that I talk about, people who are nice to you but go tell something else to their own people, is not only among policy elites, it's also among our journalists. And so a lot of Pakistani media houses do business with your media houses, etc. And you don't have the language skills. I mean, let's be very honest about the US and its limitations as well. You don't have the language skills to figure out. They always go, no, really? Did my television channel say that? Nah, they couldn't have. And you kind of buy it. So this needs to be broken. Somebody needs to start figuring it out. There have been some attempts to do that, but getting your point of view and your history and your narrative out, because narrative change is essential. When the narrative is driving policy, then that narrative needs to change. Pakistanis need to realize that, Pakistanis are told Pakistan was created in 712 AD. Do you know why? Because 712 AD is when the first Muslim conquest took place in what is today Pakistan. It's an absurd proposition. Muhammad bin Qasim couldn't pronounce Pakistan because the Arabs don't pronounce the letter P, I mean, this kind of nonsense, when you teach people that, they grow up to be pretty confused about identity, about international 65 war. Pakistan, on 6th September every year, Pakistan celebrates its victory in a war. The whole world recognizes Pakistan as having lost. I mean, people are told that Pakistan's eastern wing was taken away but through an Indian conspiracy. No mention whatsoever of the genocide and of the election and the fact that the Awami League was decimated after the election, etc., etc. Then you try to demonize individuals. The East Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's refusal to go to East Pakistan caused it. Benazir Bhutto did that. So and so did that. Sharif did this. Corruption of our leaders is the only problem. Yes, corruption is the problem, but militarism and jihadism are bigger problems than corruption.
I just ask you, why does the ISI shelter militants and shelter jihadists? Don't they know that the world knows they're doing it? The world knows that they were behind the attack, the horrific attack on Mumbai. They have been found out, and yet they still insist that somehow in their minds, it is part of the national interest of Pakistan to shelter these people. Why do they think?
Boy, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a far more powerful man in Pakistan than I managed to do. Look, they really think that there are two important things. My book opens with a description of Pakistan's founding father saying, America needs Pakistan more than Pakistan needs America. So they really have this belief that Pakistan is strategically located. It's so important that the world cannot do without us. We have the manpower that Saudis need. We have the location that the Chinese, Indians, Americans, and the Russians all feel important about. So we have an advantage. So they can call us out, they can find us out, but what are they going to do about it? And that's their attitude. So it's all about keeping the myth alive. I mean, look, you were there, 1980s, flat refusal. Ziaul Haq, hand on his heart each time, these are his exact words, quoted in my book too, by the way. I know I'm plugging the book a little bit too much, but hopefully you'll all buy it and read it. Ziaul Haq saying, I'm an honorable man, and I assure you that Pakistan does not have nuclear weapons and has no intention of having nuclear weapons. And so when your intelligence people find out intelligence about it, your President Reagan says, really? No, it can't be. Maybe he doesn't know. So there's this assumption that there are people here. I mean, like the number of people who would have this kind. I mean, I've never been able to solve this puzzle myself. Who knew Bin Laden was there and who didn't? But as long as you just keep saying, it didn't happen that way, Americans kind of push back.
Do you have an answer to that question?
No, I don't. I just know that somebody knew, and I have always said, whoever knew, whether it's a private set of individuals or people in government, it is something that needs to be uncovered for the sake of Pakistan. I keep saying that. Because if there's a private network that can keep the world's most dangerous terrorist in Pakistan, in a military garrison town, then Pakistan is in deeper trouble. Part of the answer to Jeffrey's question, Pakistanis have a romanticized view of China, a romanticized view of Saudi Arabia. But in the end, it's always the United States they come to, because that's where the crunch sort of brings them. China has helped Pakistan in small arms, etc. But a lot of the relationship with Pakistan is about how you speak, how you talk in public, how you make people feel. And the Chinese make Pakistanis feel good, but they haven't invested heavily in Pakistan. None of the major projects in Pakistan have been undertaken by the Chinese, except on a commercial basis, in which they actually just stick to purely commercial principles. And they have not been able to provide the heavy, they have helped with the nuclear program, but nothing else.
Take one, take two.
Yeah.
Most of your prescriptions
Could you identify yourself, please?
What?
Just identify yourself.
Oh, my name is Shoaib Jilani. I'm a PhD student at NYU. Most of your prescriptions assume a level of state capacity that Pakistan lacks. There are references to the all-powerful
I
ISI.
can't hear you. So hold the mic slightly away from the mouth. Yeah. Not too far, not too close. Yeah. All right. It has to be just right.
Most of your prescriptions assume a level of state capacity that Pakistan might be lacking. There are references to the all-powerful ISI, the all-powerful military, but that might be fractured at this point as well. Tax revenue collection is extremely low. So it seems that there's more bravado than anything when it comes out of the state apparatus, because Pakistan's capacity is extremely low, and there is just a fervent desire to just promote religious nationalism as a last-ditch effort. How would you, what would your recommendations be with regard to building state capacity and getting better tax revenue?
That's a very good question.
Okay, hang on a second. The last question right behind the answer to the.
Yeah, Love Puri from the UN. Disclaimer, this is my personal question or comment. This is like, having grown up at Kashmir, one of the best metaphorical transformations in terms of the US policy towards India and Pakistan is, by just watching, engaging, what's the consumption, the mass culture consumption. While in India we were watching, on the Indian side, state media was showing Russian ballet. In Pakistan they were showing Perfect Strangers, all the American sitcoms. So that really, at the risk of dumbing down the debate, that really, somehow, tells us the U-turn which the US foreign policy towards South Asia has taken. But my question is, like, we know, like, one of the cancers which afflicts Pakistan is the organizations like the Lashkar, which is like, which really, impacts the society and, which provide foot soldiers for, the organizations like Al-Qaeda. Obviously, the heavy lifting has to be done by the Pakistani state and the society. But what exactly the external players, including India, can do to make sure that this cancer is taken care of? Thank you.
But the two questions kind of tie up. So state capacity. Look, my view is, and I've worked with trying to build state capacity, etc. You can't build capacity in an area where somebody doesn't want it. So, for example, you can't. The doctor can tell you that your health will be much better if you exercise, but if you refuse to exercise, then there is no pill that is a total substitute. I mean, they can give you Lipitor to maintain your cholesterol, they'll give you something else to maintain your blood pressure, but that's not really a substitute. So, actually, while there is much that can be done on the state capacity building, John Campbell recall the real difficulties we at one point had in trying to persuade our military and intelligence service to accept support and assistance in areas where everybody knows they need assistance. It comes from that nationalism. So I think it has to be a two-pronged effort. First of all, a process of persuasion that you really need help in these areas. If you can't do it yourself, somebody else will. And I'm so glad nobody asked about drones, but since nobody did, I'll have to talk about them. In a way, that's my view on the drones. I mean, whether one likes them, one doesn't like them, I have a lot of problems with them at a philosophical level. Drone warfare doesn't allow people who are targets to surrender, for example. So it's a new kind of warfare. All those issues notwithstanding, if Pakistan had the state capacity to take out these people on ground, there would be no need for drones, armed drones to be used. So those arguments need to be made in the interaction. Now you must remember, although I've kept it to a minimum, I've kept myself at a minimum in my book, because this is not a memoir. I'm hoping that if people read this book, like it, maybe people might want to read a memoir as well. but I didn't make
We'll
this.
invite you back for that.
Yeah, I didn't make this a memoir. But I did go through all of this, and I understand where the message is getting lost. So when you give assistance for capacity building, but that assistance is given without a change on the other side in what they want to build capacity on, it's like, I'm willing to give you the money for you to go to the gym, but you're an alcoholic and you will only use it to buy alcohol, then maybe that money should not be given to you and somebody should actually take you to the gym with you every morning. And that's the kind of state capacity building that will have to be worked upon. The Pakistani state needs to be confronted and told that it is causing problems for the rest of the world. Instead of buying the narrative that, you know what, you and us together we need to do certain things. Well, no, you need to do certain things, we are willing to help you do those things, but man, you need to do them for yourself before anything else. So the all-powerful ISI, the all-powerful military are not constructs that you and I have created. It's they themselves want everybody to believe. That's why after the Bin Laden thing, one of the first things I said to the head of the Pakistani ISI was, hey, after having told everyone how nothing happens in Pakistan without our knowledge, how can now you say, but something happened without our knowledge in Pakistan and we had no knowledge. So sometimes bragging and bravado has a price. Unfortunately, they've never had to pay that price. You know, they're allowed to get away with it. What can be done about things like Lashkar-e-Taiba? Again, Hafiz Saeed is a bit of a national hero. He's painted as such by the media. And what India can do, first of all, well, India can actually do one thing. India can help bring down the decibels in Pakistan about India being an existential. I think that's already happening, in the sense that India is talking about other things. You know, people watch Bollywood movies and see that, you know, they're not all about conquering Pakistan, they're about other things, etc. So people are kind of realizing that India is economically making certain improvements. But again, India does have political groups that every few years engage in what is described as Pakistan bashing or sufficient criticism or critique of Muslims, etc., to keep alive this notion of an existential enemy. So I think the best thing India can do is to start changing that narrative from its side. Hey, we will have as many Muslims as you do. You want to come? Open. You know, more travel. You're welcome. And keep the issue of Pakistani jihadi groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, which, by the way, are a threat to Pakistan for two reasons. One, for what they do abroad and in India. But two, they can be the groups. Look, once you're a jihadi, you can belong to Group A but this is not the Republican and Democrat Party that you can't be members of both at the same time. You know, there are people who have been found to have been trained as a jihadi, working for one group, and then end up conducting an operation on behalf of another. And that is a very dangerous situation for Pakistan, with the sectarian violence increasing, domestic terrorism is increasing. I think Pakistan is right at that point where Pakistanis can be, with some effort, convinced that the real threat to Pakistan is terrorism, not India. And that all jihadi groups, including Lashkar-e-Taiba and other groups that Pakistanis see as quote-unquote freedom fighters for Kashmir, that they are all terrorist groups that need to be put out of business. Pakistan needs to get on with educating its population, making goods that it can sell internationally, expand its exports. You know, Pakistan exports are only 10% of Pakistan's GDP. Compare that with Thailand, which has 60% of its GDP comes from exports. You know, that is the discourse that Pakistan needs, rather than the discourse of jihad and settling scores with India.
I can tell you he writes as well as he talks. And Coach Thank you.